This is the story of an audacious bank robbery which occurred on Baker Street in the autumn of 1971. When a group of thieves broke into one of Britain's most renowned banks, people everywhere had questions. But it was not the millions or mementos stolen that left the spectators speechless. No weapons were brandished, nor were any alarms triggered. Yet the gang who committed the heist managed to make off with an absolute fortune. On a fateful morning in 1971, the manager of London bank made his way back to work like every other day. But things were different this time. And as he unlocked the doors to the safe deposit vault, he quickly found that out for himself. The state of the room before him looked surreal, almost out of a movie. From the scattered safety deposit boxes to the massive hole jutting from the floor, it was clear something terrible had gone down. But how did a group of rookie criminals manage to pull off one of Britain's most notorious heists? It all started with one man. Back in 1970, Tony Gavin was an established photographer working on his way around North London. But that was not the only passion of his. When he was not busy capturing moments, the talented artist was busy chasing a different thrill: mysteries. The 38-year-old had an admiration, almost infatuation, with Sherlock Holmes. So much so that come 1971, he would take a page out of the red-headed League's book, bringing one of the greatest fictional heists to life. But we are not there just yet. After all, it took months to pull off a plan this grand. Like any good story, Gavin needed main characters, partners in crime to help put his plan into play. But that actually turned out to be the easiest part. Tony was a forceful personality, as journalists revealed, a man with a propensity to be physically treated. So when it came to finding the right people for the job, the photographer put both connections and coercion to good use. And it was not long before longtime friend Reginald Tucker signed on to help carry out the heist. So they were both rookie criminals, but they knew exactly what they were doing. In no time, everything was falling into play. But another question still remained: where would they strike? They were ready to work home millionaires, but they needed the right bank to do just that. Not to mention, how would they manage to make it past security? There were endless factors to consider here. But as far as Tony was concerned, the answer was actually quite simple. He knew exactly their target long before he even voiced the plan into existence. Lloyd's Bank, situated on none other than Sherlock Holmes' Baker Street. Next, it was time to take action. On a chilly afternoon in December, Reg Tucker arrived at 185 Baker Street, ready to make the next move. As he entered the Lloyd's Bank, he put on his best smile and approached the counter. He carefully took out the £500 bills in his wallet and proceeded to open a bank account. But that's not all he did. Just a few weeks later, the stealth Brit returned to their target location, this time to rent a safety deposit box. But as he returned to the banks in the month that followed, Reg was not coming to check on his stored valuables. Well, what was he up to? During the estimated 13 times Mr. Tucker returned to the Baker Street establishment, he had one thing and one thing only on his mind. With each visit, he headed straight towards the back until he arrived at the safety deposit vault. But not for the reasons he claimed. Back in 70s, bank tellers were required to give renters privacy when they came to check in on their stored boxes. Something Reg knew all too well. And as he stood alone in the cleared out vault, the next phase of the operation was already well underway. Tucker took a deep breath as he took his surroundings. There was lots of work to be done here. Over the course of next 12 visits, the smooth criminal mapped out the entire place, every inch, every crevice, every floor tile, but that's not all he did. He took out the compact umbrella he brought with the help of the travel accessory and his very own wingspan. Reg proceeded to measure every point in the room, the 9-inch floor tiles, the bulky drawers, and every other items in his part. But the hard part was far from over. It was time to call him back. So he and Gavin were up for the challenge. But robbing one of the Britain's most guarded properties was going to next to impossible. Even they knew that much. They needed every muscle, every brain, every resource they could scrounge up. And that's exactly what they did. With the help of a car salesman Thomas Stebbins and gang member Benjamin Wolfe, Tony's grand vision was becoming more and more a reality. They hauled in an exploitive expert, an alarm expert, and 2 other members to fully complete the team. What's next? The days continued to pass, and things continued to fall into place. But as Gavin scrounged the newspaper one fateful day, their next move was practically written out before him. It couldn't be, could it? Staring back at him from the daily paper was a new property listing. But not just any listing, 𝚑𝚘𝚘𝚘𝚘 was officially going out of business. As the ad read, the owners were eager to find a replacement and were open to negotiations. But it was not the property listing's attractive price that had caught Gavin's eye. It was its address, 187 Baker Street. Located just 2 doors away from the bank, it almost seemed as if fate was on their side. How could they not jump at the opportunity? Sure enough, that's exactly what they did. For £10,000, Wolf leased the entire building, including its basement, a room that would come into play very soon. Now that they had their eyes on their target literally, the team moved on their next hurdle, security. Even if they were to go undetected, surely they would be ambushed by alarms, right? Thanks to a contact at the bank, they soon found out otherwise. The vault's sensor had been disabled due to local road work. In other words, it was a go time. On a summer day in 1971, Tony's team entered in the basement of 187 Baker Street, ready to get to work. There was no going back now. But how would they manage to enter the vault completely undetected? To Gavin, the answer was simple. They would work from the inside out. The men grabbed their tools and began drilling into Wall's stubborn concrete. Their plan: form a tunnel from 𝚑𝚘𝚘𝚘 all the way to Lloyd's, passing through the neighboring restaurant's basement. But as they soon found out, there was something easier said than done. In the weeks that followed, the gang worked endless late nights, plowing desperately through the 6-inch concrete walls. But were they in over their heads? With 40 feet of distance to account for, perhaps they were. It was exhausting physically and mentally. But all of that was about to change. After making an 18-inch wide entry hole, their drilling finally led them to the next door. It was the reassurance they desperately needed. Just 5 more feet, and it will all be over. Gavin and the rest of the group continued to work their way through the remaining concrete. Sure enough, 17,920 pounds of debris, 40 feet of tunnel, and endless hours later, the exhausted criminals finally arrived at 185 Baker Street. But what now? They survived their latest surroundings and reached a painful realization: the hard labor was not over. Not yet. They would have to dig 15 feet upwards to finally reach the foundation of the vault. Sure enough, after 3 seemingly endless months, they managed to do just that. On September 10, 1971, Gavin and his crew were finally a few feet away from taking part in one of the biggest heists in Britain history. But there was one last step. In order to finally reach the inside of that vault, the group had to plow through yet another block of concrete, 3 feet to be exact. They split the work up accordingly, placing one member on guard duty at the top of the bank's roof. In theory, it was a foolproof plan, but was it really? The scattered criminals began using walkie-talkies to communicate with one another, something intended to make things easier. But what they didn't know was that the same thing that meant to help their heist was about to be the downfall of their entire operation. What went wrong? On Saturday, September 11, a London local was relaxing at a home when he suddenly found himself propped in the middle of the crime. He had been flipping through the channels of his radio set looking for some late-night entertainment. Little did Robert Rowlands know what awaited him. As he tried unsuccessfully to tune into his favorite station, Radio Luxembourg, fate had other plans. Instead, Robert was met with something entirely different, an unfamiliar broadcast that he would never had before. He began to listen to the voices on the other end of his radio, and that's when it hit him. Sir, he did not quite know what exactly he would stumbled upon. But what did he know? What was the conversation he was suddenly eavesdropping on was? Something didn't seem right. Rob turned up the set's volume, eager to get a better listen. As Gavin and his counterparts continued to argue on their walkie-talkies, Robert continued to listen on in amazement. Had he just stumbled across a crime in the making? He listed as the criminals continued to disagree on the right way to break through the vault's door. What vault, and what were they breaking through it? He didn't know where, he didn't know why, nor how. But Robert Rowlands had enough of pieces to know that something illegal was going on. He reached for his landline with shaky hands. He punched in the number of the local police department and waited for an answer. As respondents answered the calls, the flustered caller explained everything: the radio broadcast, the conversation, the shady behavior. Something was seriously wrong, he explained. Unfortunately, the police didn't see it that way, and as Rowlands continued to plead his case, he was met with a final warning. Call us back when you have concrete evidence, the irritated officer told him before hanging up. After all, it was 1 a.m. on Saturday night. The local PD has experienced enough drunk drivers to know not to take every call seriously. If only they knew what we know now. But while they were skeptical, Mr. Rowland was all too sure in himself. He was going to prove them wrong. He reached for his cassette tape and turned back into a radio dial, and braced himself for more confusing chatter. But even he could not believe what came next.
Look, the place is filled with fumes where we was, and if the security come in and smell the fumes, we're all going to take stoppo and none of us have got nothing. Whereas this way, we've all got 300 grand to cut up. And when we come back tomorrow, security have nosed it up for us, well, at least we've got something. Over.
As Robert continued to listen on the conversation, he suddenly had everything he needed. The excited bystander raced for the phone again. This time he knew exactly what was going on. He dialed Scotland Yard hotline as his heart continued to race. Was he already too late, or perhaps more importantly, what if he was mistaken? There was no going back now. From the chilling conversation to now, the concrete evidence, it didn't take long for cops to piece everything together. Mr. Rowlands had stumbled across a bank heist. But not just any bank heist. If their suspicions were right, these criminals were in the process of pulling one of the most shocking crimes in Britain's history. Time was of the essence, there was much given, and so the startled officers hopped in their cars and set off their search for Britain's stealthiest criminals. But where would they even start? They decided to score 750 bank within a 10-mile radius of Rowland's home. But was that even doable? On Sunday, September 12, as ununiformed officers swarmed through Lloyd's bank doors, they were in for the surprise of their lives. A robbery had been going on in that security deposit vault. They had had it with their own ears. But one look at the vault door and they certainly would not know any better. Not only was the entrance secured tightly, but the time-sensitive lock it boasted showed no evidence of break-in. How could that be? The officers were baffled, but they had to face the facts. They packed up their patrol cars, closed the case and headed home. For now. Little did they know, on the other side of the vault doors, a catastrophic crime was busy taking place. Gavin and his companions scrambled as they pried through each of the security deposit boxes. They sifted through shiny jewelry, securities and crisp words of cash, scrounging up whatever valuables they could. After breaking open 270 plus boxes, the criminals gathered their collections of stolen goods and braced themselves for the hardest part yet, the escape. In theory it was simple, hop back down the tunnel they came from and disappear for good. But how exactly they were to pull off later? Safe to say their troubles were just getting started. Just 2 days later, as the manager of Lloyd's Bank headed to the work, their actions were about to catch up with them. The employee fumbled with his keys and made his way inside the establishment. Nothing out of the ordinary, as expected. That was until he reached the vault. As he opened the doors of the sealed space, he could not believe his eyes. Stacks of empty safety deposit boxes lying strewn across on the floor, a massive hole on the same floor spanning majority of the room. Lloyd's Bank had been robbed. Only this nightmare was just beginning. With roughly £3 million stolen, several valuables lost and endless questions from the public, Lloyd's Bank had lots of explaining to do. And that's when the investigation truly began. As local police tried to wrap their heads around the mess before them, it was not long before they stumbled across their first clue. Scribbled on the walls of the thrust vault, the officers were instantly taken back. "Let's see how Sherlock Holmes solved this one," the amused robbers had written. Only they would not be laughing for long, at least so long as the public head is safe. In the blink of an eye, the Baker Street robbery had gone viral. Just about everyone in Britain either heard of the disturbing news or were the ones breaking into their friends and family, and perhaps with good reason. After all, a crime this big was rare, almost unheard of for a place like London. Back in 1971, as news broke to the stalking heist, it instantly captivated citizens. But perhaps the most striking part of it all, the idea that a group of inexperienced criminals could successfully pull off such a robbery, especially one targeting some of Britain's most powerful, most wealthy. Word continued to spread like wildfire about the unusual crime, and soon the case took an even weirder turn. On September 17, 1971, after endless chatter about the Baker Street heist, suddenly everything stopped. Everyone had got silent, almost as if nothing ever happened. As the case continued gaining momentum, the British government decided to issue a D-notice. In other words, news outlets were no longer allowed to discuss the crime, for national security purposes, as enforcers put it. Why was the Queen interfering with an ongoing investigation? Granted, the D-notice was intended to help keep both the story and civilians' rest, but the consequences it led to did anything but. Spectators were captivated by a mysterious story, desperate for answers, and as the government attempted to get involved, they set off to fill in the blanks themselves. Chilling conspiracy theories begin to arise about the famous heist. Were there other unknown parties involved? where we're looking at government cover-up. As theorists continued pointing fingers, they soon settled upon a familiar face, Princess Margaret. Back in the day, Queen Elizabeth II's sister was no stranger to scandal. The Countess of Snowdon was constantly being named in the British tabloids. But this time around, her ties to case were too obvious to ignore, at least where conspirators were concerned. As they alleged, the Heist was hatched after revealing Polaroids of the princess ended up in the wrong hands, those of London criminal Michael X. The same Michael X who had rented out security deposit box at Lloyd's Bank. The same Michael X whose deposit box had gone missing after the heist. Coincidence? As the days continued to grow, so did the shocking conspiracy theories surrounding the royal family. But by October 1971, the case reached a new development as 4 criminals were brought in for famed robbery: Wolf, Tucker, Stevens, and of course Gavin. As for how police finally connected the dots. While the criminals spent endless time crafting the perfect crime, they did not realize their biggest mistake was hiding in plain sight: the store. After tracing the tunnel back to Lee-Sack, it was not long before the cops were led to Mr. Wolf, the same man who used his real name to release the solve. After that, it was a game over. What started as fascination with the fictional character led to one of the most pivotal crimes in Britain history. But 50 plus years later, and one question still remains. We now know all about the months of planning, the drilling, security bypasses, storefront property, but how much do we really know? How did the 4 men with no criminal backgrounds manage to pull off such a feat? And perhaps more importantly, why had the police been inclined to check 750 banks in a 10-mile radius when Rob's radio could only pick up signals from half-mile radius? Was this a case of pure luck, or perhaps was there more to the conspiracy theories?